If we're really going to have that conversation, you're absolutely right. It has to be all inclusive, but the reality is it isn't.
Well, there it is. I think that's a time for a pause, for a reflection. So can we take a break real quick and then come back?
Creando conexiones durante la recuperación de un trastorno mental y uso de sustancias pone toda la fuerza de la familia y comunidad apoyándole a usted, ofreciendo apoyo y esperanza. Únete a las voces de la recuperación, fortaleciendo familias y comunidades.
Para información confidencial sobre desórdenes mentales y de uso de sustancias para usted o alguien que conoce, llame al 1-800-662-4357. Patrocinado por el Departamento de Salud y Servicios Humanos de los Estados Unidos.
Building relationships during recovery from mental and substance use disorders can put the strength of family and community behind you. We're all connected, offering encouragement, support, and hope. Join the Voices for Recovery. Strengthen families and communities.
For confidential information on mental and substance use disorders, including prevention and treatment referrals for you or someone you know, call 1-800-662-HELP. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
And we're back with Doopy Deep with Dr. Nikki. It's okay, Dr. Nikki.
I'm back.
Run back.
I'm back.
It's okay.
I'm back. Okay.
She ready? She ready?
She ready.
All right. Are you sure she ready?
Sure. Yeah.
It's okay. We can talk amongst ourselves. It's all right. You go ahead on. I want to talk about this gay agenda that DJ Baker knows so much about and see what Alfredo and Jude and Ebony think about this. Do you all think there is a gay agenda?
I believe there should be all types of agendas. Everyone has an agenda. It's to be honest to say that you have an agenda. We all have an agenda. Every group has an agenda. And the agenda is to be heard, seen, and represented. And that's their agenda. That's the agenda.
So I'm going to ask a question, if you don't mind, Dr. Nikki, of everyone.
Sure.
Dr. Ebony and Alfredo and Jude, when you hear gay agenda, what does that mean to you?
I feel like, can you guys hear me? I feel like I never heard it before. And so I'm interested to hear more. But when I hear it initially, it is very true. Everybody has an agenda, but it sounds like the way that it has been used has a negative connotation to it. I don't think that there's anything particularly wrong with having an agenda to have your voice heard, to be seen. Mm-hmm. We all struggle, and as we talked about before, with being seen. And we all can't end up at the table together if we aren't seen and if we aren't advocating for ourselves to be there. So all of us are pushing an agenda. One of the things that I find particularly interesting, though, is that within the LGBTQ plus community, there are smaller agendas even within that space.
Say more about that, Ebony.
So there's this agenda from the one side to hurry up and choose. Either you're going to be femme or you're going to be masculine. Like, you can't be both. You need to hurry up and make a decision. Mm-hmm. And so there's the agenda to come to this side. There's the agenda to come to that side. And when I say agenda, I'm also using it to mean advocating. So people are saying, oh, well, you need to do this and you need to do that, because otherwise it doesn't make sense in my mind. So while I'm pushing this agenda, I'm also pushing to have it make sense to me and have my own experiences be seen as well. Mm-hmm. So I don't understand it, so it doesn't make sense. So I'm going to need you to hurry up and just go ahead and be this or be that. And we don't realize that how that is very negatively impacting even the LGBTQ plus community, and is taking us away from being able to come together and be a cohesive community as we kind of ideally should be. I know that when I first started identifying as a lesbian, trying to figure out what was going on in my world, I was trying to figure out, okay, so what do I do? So I hurry up and rush to the lesbian side. And I was like, okay, because I'm going to have to, in my own mind, make sense of this. And so that helped me to kind of organize and control what was going on, in a sense, which is, I think, essentially what everybody is trying to do control what is happening. So I hurried up and did that. And then as life kind of happened, I was like, well, wait a minute, that doesn't feel comfortable. That doesn't really sum up who I am. So let me kind of figure this out. And then it was when I took a step back from the community that I was like, okay, I can be whoever I want to be. But it was outside of identifying as a member of that community per se. And when I say that, I mean throwing myself all in it. Because when I was in postdoc and internship, I was kind of like in it. But now I'm not as active in the community. And I feel more comfortable with the way that I've identified and the way that I'm sort of labeling myself these days. And it's because I don't have that pressure. So there's definitely an agenda and all sorts of mini agendas or sub-agendas being pushed at the same time.
Interesting. We haven't heard from you in a while, Jude. You still over there with us?
Yeah, I'm around. Yeah, I'm just like listening and kind of reflecting on kind of what people are bringing up. And yeah, I think kind of everybody's kind of come at it from, like has a little bit of a different perspective. I think for me, when I hear gay agenda, like it kind of, it reminds me of like, because I grew up like, in a very conservative kind of Christian context. So like, Chinese churches are kind of its own thing. It's very Southern Baptist influenced, and so it has, so it shares a lot of similarities in terms of kind of like, and kind of the cultural values and theology within the church community. And so, I feel like, and I could be wrong historically, but at least what I feel like the gay agenda, because I know Dr. Nikki and Tomas, y'all were joking at the very beginning of this podcast about talking about the gay agenda, kind of being cheeky about the term. And I think it's because that the phrase gay agenda was coined by, I think, the conservative right and the Christian right. So it's so I think there's nothing inherently wrong with an agenda per se, but I think the gay agenda, was kind of created as a scare tactic, and then I think in some ways the like, I would say like the liberal, neoliberal, white kind of cis-normative, homonormative kind of folks have kind of tried to reclaim the gay agenda, kind of jokingly, like this is our gay agenda and it's very focused on marriage equality. So I think I would lean a little more with what Tomas was saying just before the break, that, it does have this very like exclusive kind of feel to it. I think about, this is almost like a traumatic event that I don't talk about too much, but I was working with, I don't want to like maybe that traumatic is too strong of a word, but, definitely a very unpleasant experience. But, I was working with, youth, and this was, at the time that I was like kind of transitioning gender wise, so socially it was very awkward because, like think about people going through puberty. It's just a very awkward stage, and I remember being in a space, working in a very conservative space with youth. And I think, even though I made no references or whatever to my queerness or my gender identity or anything, but, the fact that I just looked very in between, there ended up being like a formal report by a student to like her mom and then the district about me. And it was like, and it was like very interesting, and so the district called me, kind of said, we have this concern. And they were reading off the report, and it was absurd because, the student had claimed that, like she felt very uncomfortable that I was walking close in her space and that she was afraid to asked to go to the restroom because she was afraid that I might follow her there, and she was saying that I was saying things like you love who you love and stuff like that. And those are all very, very much talking points that I think come out of like the very like both some of it from like the, like the neoliberal white kind of like
fear campaign.
Both from like the liberal side and the conservative side. Like I feel like those are talking points that conservatives use. So it was really sad because I think she felt a true sense of fear, but really based around this idea of what her parents have community has planted in her head, and it was around this idea of the gay agenda, right? And my defense was like, when I reflect on my identity and how I talk, honestly, it's a personal policy that I keep my private stuff private in these spaces. And then two, that's not even the language that I choose to use to talk about it if I do talk about that stuff, So I feel like that language of you can't help, you love who you love, or you can't help who you love. I mean, I'm not against that messaging, but that definitely is also that also is a political messaging that I feel like has come out of the campaigning of white cis male gays, and so that is very much on the marriage equality front. And so, I think about that, and I think about, going back to the idea of power, and we talk about, I think your question earlier, Dr. Nikki, was what's your experience of the broader LGBTQ plus community? Yeah. And the thing is, I've been struggling lately to really wonder, what is that community? Because I don't know if I feel a strong connection with it, but what is that community? Is how real is it, and how much of a myth is it in our minds? Because when you look at power, just if you even look at economically, we say the top 1% holds, a majority of the wealth and power, compared to everybody else. I feel the same, there's not same, but it's sort of analogous to kind of white cis male gays, right? Where in my mind, it seems like that is the broader queer community, but I know that that's not actually true. And the reality is that might not even be the majority of the people within our larger community, but in terms of their access to power and who gets visibility and who gets to set the quote unquote agenda of who people see and who gets to push, spaces forward and what is considered progressive or whatever, they take up a lot of that space, and so I struggle with knowing where I fall in that, because I feel like I am very inclined to also buy into the myth when I think about it, even though I know that that's not actually the larger community, but still, because, even if you look at bars and clubs and politics, they take up so much space. So that does feel like what the larger community is. And, if that's how I feel, even as somebody who kind of falls within this umbrella, I imagine that for somebody who's just kind of on the outside looking in, if you don't know the nuances, it's very easy to just kind of buy into that myth as well.
I think that I appreciate this last part of what you're saying, Jude, but I think I think it goes back to this bigger conversation that I think is ongoing in just POC circles, and it's around representation and how much representation matters. And so even if, and this speaks a little bit to research that Ebony and I used to do, right? About even if you are a member of a community, if you're internalizing messages about your community, it starts to then shape your own identity about the community that you're supposed to be connected to or related to. And so, when I've been and Tomas and I, we live to be cheeky. We're the cheeky twins. And so that's the kind of sarcastic reference I was making earlier to, is this narrative that you've talked about in terms of conservative, I would even say probably white evangelical tone around what a gay agenda is, right? Is this kind of subversive ideology that's being presented and trying to co-opt young, innocent people's minds. And that's, I've always find that kind of that idea a little bit absurd. So I was making fun of that. And I appreciate hearing DJ Baker's side, because I'm hearing him talk about it through a different lens. And I'm like, oh, I kind of like that idea. But I do think this idea of representation, and when you talk about, I'll say from my experience, all of the optics in conversation around repealing DOMA was white gay men, and maybe a lesbian couple thrown in here or there. And that when we talk about mainstream media and how gayness is portrayed on mainstream media, it's almost all white gay men. And when they're queer characters of color, they're either their sexual identity is kind of mentioned in passing, maybe in a pilot, and then they've never talked about it after that. There's no part